Mick Mulvaney, good to see you. First of all, we're all grappling with our economies bouncing back after COVID or living with COVID. But what are the fundamentals in the US looking like at the moment? A bit shaky?
Yeah, the fundamentals are still fairly pro-inflation. We're going through what everybody in the world is going through, which is sort of the world opening back up after COVID. But our government has added about $6 trillion in spending this year through legislation to help us get out of COVID, to recover from COVID, and things that are really not related to COVID, but are very expensive. It happens usually when our Democrats are in charge of the White House and the Senate and the House. But $6 trillion, even in our economy, is just a huge number. At the same time, we're having a very difficult time getting things to market. Some of that is COVID related. Some of that is related to new regulations that the administration has put on. So when you define inflation as too much money chasing too few goods, we have a lot more money sloshing around, but fewer and fewer goods and services that can actually get to market. Some of those will go away when we sort of bounce back from COVID. Some of those are more permanent. We also have a Federal Reserve Bank here that's controlling our monetary policy that continues to be very soft on inflation. They are indicating maybe raising interest rates next year, but they're very slow to do so. So the fundamentals here, or to get to your question, look like it's going to be inflationary here for at least the next 4 to 6 months.
Mick, I mean, we all needed that stimulus. We did it here in Australia. It was a huge spending program, but we're talking about $6 trillion in the US, which is hard for us to even get our heads around. How much of that was overspent, do you think?
It's so hard to tell, Laura, with these bills because the money gets spent over a long period of time. They're buried in many, many programs. I used to run the Office of Management and Budget, and believe me, I know how to bury money in the federal government, and there's literally millions of places to put it. But for example, they're debating a bill now as to whether or not we should give tax credits to television networks. I'm not making that up. Whether or not we should subsidize salmon fishing, all sorts of things that are in a COVID bill. They're in a Build Back Better from COVID bill, but they're not really COVID related. So it's always hard to say. What I tell people is that about half of what you hear that is going to be spent is actually related to COVID, and the other half is just stuff that people like and politicians have a chance to approve. So we're probably not the only country where that happens.
Yeah, well, look, I've got to say, tax credits to television networks don't sound all that bad from where I'm sitting right now. But let's talk China, because we haven't spoken since there was this diplomatic boycott announced by the Biden administration. Australia followed suit pretty quickly after that, but it doesn't look like there was anything coordinated with the US's allies.
It was very strange. And you and I first talked, I think, probably 4 weeks ago on the night of the conversation that President Biden had with President Xi. We find out now, right after the boycott was announced, that the White House had made the decision to boycott the Olympics, or at least do the diplomatic boycott of the Olympics, before that conversation with President Xi, but then admitted they did not raise it with him. This is sort of rubbing salt in the wound. Not only did we do it, but we didn't tell them that we were going to do that when they had a 3-hour conversation. Additionally, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, I don't think we reached out to that many people. I know that Australia has followed. There's some talk of maybe 1 or 2 European countries following us, but there was no coordinated effort on the front end to get other countries to go along, which allows the Chinese to sort of try and drive a wedge between the U.S. and Australia and, say, the UK and Japan if they decide not to go along with this particular boycott. So sort of a ham-fisted approach to diplomacy, not sure what the goal was there. I think, by the way, it was the right decision. There are several Republicans who think they didn't go far enough, just to show you how the antipathy towards China here is truly bipartisan. I think the Biden decision was the right decision, but once again, a pure execution on the heels of what happened in Afghanistan. It's sort of becoming a trend with this administration.
Yeah, sure. And there was all eyes on Biden as he dealt with Russia and Vladimir Putin as well when it comes to the Ukraine situation. I guess many people were watching that as some kind of indication of where Biden will go with foreign policy, and if there was ever any flare-up with China and Taiwan, what Biden would do. Do you think that we should see that as a bit of a proxy issue, the Ukraine-Russia thing, as to what Biden might do elsewhere?
It's certainly a challenge. It certainly is that the two will be looked at through the same sort of perspective, right? I think Russia is a little bit different because of how close it is to our friends and neighbors in Europe, but also because of what happened in Crimea. So you have some things where there's history there in the recent past where Russia invaded and annexed Crimea, and we didn't really do that much against Russia, certainly did very, very little, if anything, militarily. China, obviously a bigger deal with Taiwan, but a lot further away, closer to you, further from us. And it's certainly further from the Europeans. So geopolitics is going to always be sort of a strange thing to get your hands around. But I think they will be looked at through the same perspective. One will be sort of a test for the other. One would be a red line for the other, but they could move in very different directions.
Yeah, it's funny. AUKUS is such a big deal here because it's a big change in our strategic alliances. We've really upset the French. But in the United States, is it even being mentioned?
Well, it is. It's in with the people who care. In a very small community of people, and they count because those are the folks on Capitol Hill, in the White House, who are helping formulate policy and how to develop sub-policies to back up AUKUS. It is a very big deal for us at that level. At the public level, it's not. My guess is 99.5% of the country doesn't know what AUKUS is, and that's fine. They don't have time to deal with all these issues. That's why they pay folks to do it for them at the federal level. But with the folks that count, yeah, it is a big deal, and it should be a big deal. So unfortunately, the French got upset about it, but that's life in the big city. It's nice to see the UK and Australia and US working as closely as they are.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, our Deputy Prime Minister is in Washington, D.C. He had all these meetings lined up. Then he brought COVID from UK to the US and he's having to isolate in probably a lovely D.C. hotel room. But he was there to really talk to some US lawmakers about big tech. And I know there's a committee looking at this at the moment. This is something our government here is really concerned about, the unlevel playing field and how they deal with misinformation. How big of an issue is this in the US?
It is. Again, it's a big deal to the people who count. So if you watched our news at night tonight, if you watched Fox or CNN or ABC, it wouldn't really be discussed. China, the major issues would be discussed, but sort of the machinations that go on in the back rooms. AUKUS is sort of it's a very detailed thing that means a lot to the professionals, but it doesn't get a lot of national attention. It's the right thing for us to do at the right time. It was especially important, I think, for the UK because it was something they would not have been able to do but for their departure from the EU. So the timing was right. It's sending the right message to the Chinese. It's saying that we are going to stick together. We have been friends for a very, very long time. That is not going to change, even with China rising in monetary and in military authority. So it is important, even though you don't read about it every single day in the press.
Mick, we're looking at these devastating pictures out of Kentucky. You know, tornadoes is not something we experience here in Australia. The devastation is just really hard to get your head around. Can you explain what this part of America is like, what the economic hit might be as well?
Yeah, I can try. The southeastern and the midwestern part of our country are subject to tornadoes. I live here in the southeast in South Carolina. We have them. They have them a lot worse and more frequently in the Midwest just because of the way the weather works in this country. This storm, Laura, was epic. It was the largest storm in 100 years. It was on the ground for, we think now, 200 miles. Ordinarily, a tornado in this part of the country might be around for 35, 40 seconds. A really long one could be 4 or 5 minutes. This was on the ground for 200 miles, maybe as long as 3 or 4 hours. Think about a hurricane compressed into a space a mile wide. And a mile wide for a tornado is huge. Sometimes they'll come down to the neighborhoods. They'll take your house across the street, but not take the house next to you. They're very compact. This was a massive, massive storm, the largest since 1925. And we're all afraid the death toll is going to be higher. It was a devastating type of storm, unlike those that we ordinarily have, especially this time of year. December is not tornado season for us, typically more in the late spring and early summer in our part of the world.
Yeah, well, we hope those thousands of people get everything they need to get back on track and rebuild their homes. Before I let you go, an election's never far away. Any indication whether Donald Trump will run again or not?
Yeah, Donald Trump wants you to believe he's running again, and I think everyone's assuming that he is. Donald Trump once told me one thing, Laura, and I believe him, that he didn't make the decision to run in 2016 until he was standing at the top of the escalator when he turned to his wife and says, "What do you think? We should do this or not?" And that's when he made his final decision. That's the way Donald Trump is. He's a seat of the pants, gut type of politician. And while he's sending all the messages that he's going to run again in 2024, there's no way that's a final decision. A lot can happen between now and then, and I'm sure we get a chance to talk about it.
Okay, that's an amazing bit of history you just let us in on there. So he might, he's keeping all his options open, but a final decision might not come until the 11th hour.
Or after that.
Or after that, indeed. Mick Mulvaney, great to talk to you as always. Have a great Christmas. We'll see you next year.